Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for the Jurisdictional command of Tunguska. In this video, we're talking about who Tunguska are, how they play, what are their strengths, weaknesses, and faction identity, before jumping into Infinity Army to go through many of the profiles that showcase this faction and how they play. Now, before we begin, there are a few thanks to give out. Firstly, thanks to channel supporter Barbecue is Tasty for the request to do Tunguska as a faction focus. As always, I take requests from channel supporters either on YouTube as channel members or via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. People who have requests about faction focuses, battle report topics, and similar. This one comes from Barbecue is Tasty. Barbecue is Tasty. I hope you'll enjoy this video. But a second set of thank yous go out to the large number of people who gave me a hand with contributions to this video. Tunguska is not a faction that I have played significantly in N5. I kind of have an appraisal of them. I've played against them a little bit, but it is a bit more surface level than I would like to do something like a faction focus video. And so, big thanks to Hachimantaro, Inane Imp, and then a bunch of my locals for jumping in with ideas and contributions and their own experience, which I could not match by myself. Hachimantaro, that's Lachlan in particular, did very well with Tunguska at the recent large event in Australia, Border Bash. We will see one of his lists showcased, apart among two, at the end of this video. And it really would not have been possible to put this video together without all of those contributions. So thanks guys, all of you. Now Tunguska sit in N5 in kind of a similar thematic place to where they sat in N4. They occupy the niche of the elite Nomad faction. We're going to see a lot more pieces in this faction that sit at about the 30 plus point range. And even the cheaper elements in the faction will often be perhaps a little bit more expensive than we might see somewhere else in a faction that is more known for containing more discount pieces. This means that Tunguska is going to involve a lot more list building trade-offs and concessions, because it is difficult to hit that 15 trooper limit while you're sustaining those kind of more expensive elite troopers. But the payoff is that we do get access to a number of very compelling profiles and indeed regiments with many profiles within them that have a really significant table impact, as you would expect, given that they are more expensive than their contemporaries elsewhere in Nomads. And provided you can build a list that accommodates those more expensive pieces, maybe by having just a few more pieces in the cheap, cheerful cheerleader kind of category to supplement the expensive stuff, or by acknowledging that, look, we're not going to get any really big luxury elements in this faction. We are going to have the bulk of our force be in that mid-range point cost, but with no really spiky elements of high strength. It's going to be the sustained, consistent, multiple models in that points level working together. You can get some really significant payoff in list construction, where Tunguska's N5 strengths start to emerge. And this is also where we start to see how the addition change has affected Tunguska, because by and large, many of the profiles that were good in N4 have kind of translated very well into N5. If you had an N4 Tunguska collection, there is a pretty good chance that you can more or less translate most of it one-to-one into the new edition, despite the fact that there have been many balance passes and changes and updates and tinkers to individual profiles. Where the big changes have occurred, as they so often do, is in what is good and how building your list out and your link teams out is good, as it has been changed by changes to the rules to the game, changes to how link team works, etc. And so we're going to start, when we talk about strengths of Tunguska, by talking about those link teams. We will spend quite a lot of time talking about link teams in the army section, but the very interesting thing, and one of the things that is kind of unique about Tunguska, is that they have two very different and valid approaches to link team setup. The first is that they can be a faction with just very good duos, like multiple very good duos can find their way into a Tunguska list, generally built around either Bounty Hunter, Naamnic, and Hollowman teams. All of these can produce very appealing duos. Perseus in particular is an all-star, but there are a suite of different ways to construct these and have them move around the battlefield with high mobility, have high impact, etc. But on the other end of the spectrum, specifically when we're talking about Hollowmen in particular, Tunguska are one of the few remaining factions in the game that are the organic home of actually a very large heavy infantry link team. Even Invincible Army in N5 does not natively drift necessarily toward a 5-person heavy infantry team. Invincibles saw quite a lot of hype early in the edition. I had a number of people tell me, hey, Invincibles are really, really good now. And then they would show me lists that were just vanilla Yuching with the serial numbers filed off. And while they absolutely were very good lists, it's taken a fair bit of time for Invincibles to drift at all back towards lists that are even remotely reminiscent of how they played in N4 with those big heavy link teams. And that's still great in terms of faction versatility for Invincibles, but if we are actually going and looking and casting our eyes across Infinity N5, looking for a faction that does a full 5-person link team, those are rare, and they are rare because of how link team bonuses have changed. Once you get past a Fireteam duo, the bonuses that you get from being part of a Fireteam become really quite incremental. None of them are bad. The Discover and Dodge roll is good, the Ballistic Skill bonus is good, Sixth Sense is situational but can be very, very good if you have a hacker in the link. But none of those bonuses are so powerful that you rush towards a 5-person link just to access the bonuses. Instead, in N5, it's very important that every individual member of a link team justify their existence on their own merits. And when we get to Holomen, what we will see is a collection of profiles that you can just keep adding into a link team, all of which are good and interesting and useful, which gets us organically, if we want, to a full 5-person link. And having taken all of those profiles, because they're good, we now have a suite of 5 team members, usually 4 Holomen and Perseus, who are benefiting from all of those bonuses, giving us Ballistic Skill 14 linked pitches, good ARO pieces, extremely good smoke, good short-range gunfighting, a Sixth Sense hacker behind a tin bot, multiple specialist profiles, etc. And that's genuinely unique in N5. A 5-person powerful fire team is just not an archetype that natively emerges in many places at all, and it exists in Tunguska, and it's good. One of the 2 lists that we will showcase at the end of this video is a list that Hachiman, Lachlan, took to Border Bash and features a big Hollow Man fire team. And while Tunguska is not just the faction of Hollow Men, the fact that they are the only faction that can get Hollow Men, and the fact that Hollow Men configure themselves really well into fire teams of a variety of sizes is a faction strength. Hollow Men are also part of another faction strength that Tunguska has, which is that it is a mobility faction. Now, when we get to limitations, we will talk about how this is not really a faction that uses infiltration or forward deployment much at all. But one of the things Tunguska has that more than makes up for that is that it is very high mobility out of the deployment zone. We will see a lot of profiles, some okay and some very good, but just a lot of profiles that have mobility skills. Super jump, sometimes with jet propulsion, and climbing plus are both present in significant numbers in Tunguska. And these are present both on fire teams, and fast super jumping fire teams are very cool, but also on Tunguska's surprisingly long list of really quite viable and interesting solo operator pieces. Tunguska is not left out in the cold when it comes to pieces that aren't part of fire teams. You are not constrained to just your teams of duos or your big core. And that's very useful because when we talk about Tunguska being, look, this is the elite faction, right? We have to pay a little bit more for a lot of our pieces. We will often find ourselves in Tunguska building lists where it is the duo or the core or the teams of duos, and the lists are padded out by cheerleaders, auto-generating remotes, cheaper-ish warbands. That would put us in kind of an awkward situation if we didn't have other solo operator pieces as outlets for our orders where it wasn't really the time or place for the duos or the fire teams to move. The presence of this surprisingly long list of stuff that doesn't need to be in a fire team but is cool, interesting, and compelling to go into a list means that we really shouldn't in Tunguska be in a situation where to enact any kind of plan, we have to sink 2 or 3 orders into moving a piece that is in the wrong part of the table to elsewhere to do something. Things like puppet bots, hecklers, interventors, our combat jump troops, even the Zondnaut in N5 are all appealing and interesting and combine well with the other pieces with the link teams that we'll find in a Tunguska list. Finally, mentioning Interventors, Tunguska is the faction of Interventors, and it is a faction with excellent hacking. Given how pieces like pitches work in N5, Tunguska has actually eclipsed vanilla Nomads. Vanilla Nomads can do a more efficient hacking game where it's just slightly cheaper cost on a lot of the pieces, but in terms of muscular hacking power, Tunguska has linked high ballistic skill pitches and plentiful fast pandas and interventors, and there isn't really a substitute for access to interventors. And those interventors are in turn supplemented by actually a surprisingly reasonable list of other hackers that you might find yourself splashing into a list, including a few hackers that are hackers with upgrades that give them programs, either regular hacking devices with Trinity or killer hacking devices with Carbonite, stuff like that, to make Tunguska into, as we would expect, a faction that can, if it wants to, have really good hacking. Now, in terms of limitations and then where does the faction sit in terms of the broader Nomad spectrum, we've mentioned a few of these already. This is a faction where many of the models are expensive. We don't really have access to cheap, like really cheap pieces that easily supplement a list out after we've paid for a lot of expensive things. We also don't really have much in the way of infiltration. Tunguska will struggle to make a lot of use of the space outside their deployment zone. Hecklers have very constrained forward deployment, and Spectres are fine but expensive. And finally, and this really is worth noting as a limitation, despite the fact that there have been a lot of profile updates over the course of N4 to N5, there are still a lot of profiles in Tunguska that are mediocre to bad, and that includes some of the new things that have been added. Switches Grouper I don't mind at all, but Tunguska Triggermen are a complete flop. Many of the other new reinforcement associated profiles don't link particularly well. Stuff like Sforza that was bad in N4 is still bad in N5. And to add hilarious insult to injury, a tag has been added to Tunguska, giving us 2 tags, and it's the Anaconda. And this means, especially if you are a newer player trying to start with Tunguska, there can be a fair bit of junk to sort through to find the good and interesting stuff in this faction. The good and interesting stuff is there, but it is a faction that can invite new player mistakes and poor new player purchases just because the model is available and we bought it, or the model is available and we put it in a list. And so to tie all of that together, where I think Tunguska best sits is actually as part of a Nomad collection. Because of that interestingly long list of good independent operators, something that you will actually find is that there is a fair bit of overlap between cool stuff in vanilla and cool stuff in Tunguska that you would take after the inclusion of things like Hollowmen. And if you have a vanilla Nomads faction that can also be used to play Tunguska or vice versa, that pairing in particular gives you a very interesting dynamic in terms of the factions that you can choose for any given tournament mission mix. Bakunin stands alone really quite well. Bakunin is a very self-contained faction. Corregidor are just kind of off doing their own thing in the corner with their crayons. But Tunguska and Nomads as a pairing will share many of the same models and let you look at a mission mix and go, oh, this mission mix has actually a few exclusion zones. That might be a little bit of a problem for vanilla Nomads, but it's not at all for Tunguska. This is a mission mix where I'll play Tunguska. And that's something that we'll actually see when we look at Lachlan's list that he took to Border Bash. I think Tunguska was an inspired choice for that mission mix. Border Bash had a very hostile set of 5 scenarios. It included 2 exclusion zones and a confused deployment scenarios out of 5, which basically means that if you wanted to play like Ariadna, for example, you were just committing to the pain. But in Tunguska, we are not bound by the need to use that midfield space, and to the extent that we do, it's often drop troops, and drop troops are totally fine in exclusion zone scenarios in this ITS season. And that positions Tunguska as a scenario that flexes back and forth between itself and vanilla Nomads in a really compelling way without being financially ruinous to collect both. That puts them in a very nice overall spot, offering a very distinct and unique play experience along compared to Nomads, despite having a lot of model commonality. And while I wouldn't be surprised if they see a rework or some reworks to their profiles over the course of N5, because as mentioned, there are a few things in their particular Triggerman that really need a little bit of a look, even restricting ourselves to the profiles that are good, there is a long list of cool things to go through, and so let's crack on with that. Now we're going to start, as usual, by going through our link team options before progressing on to things that operate a little bit more independently. But we're really going to speed through the Securitate team. And that's because this is a team that can have just a ton of things go into it, but also which you probably just shouldn't take most of the time. The Securitate Fireteam is very awkward to build in a way that gets duo bonuses. Securitate themselves are 13-point line troops. And while there are an absolute suite of models that can theoretically comprise this team, it ends up just being kind of link soup, which N5 was explicitly designed to try and prevent from being good, and shock, shock, horror, it's been successful in the case of the Securitate team. There's just not really much that is going on here, despite the large number of things that are present in the Securitate Fireteam roster, but just for completeness, Securitate. You probably shouldn't take these, but if you're going to take any, probably the most appealing profile is the 13-point repeater with a boarding shotgun. Having a repeater that can't be isolated has some very niche applications, and you must have one Securitate in a link in order to form that fire team. With the trouble then beginning that there are very few other things that count as Securitate that you want, so you need to find your fire team bonuses elsewhere. You could theoretically have a second Securitate, just wear that, maybe make it a paramedic. But if you want to give duo bonuses to something, you also have the option of taking two Interventors, putting them in the fire team for duo bonuses, and then adding some kind of a static gun to act as a fire base. Probably the most useful piece for that purpose is a Cyclone. Not because it's necessarily fantastic, it is a single wound piece, but because of all of the elements that we can add, it's the only one with really long range bands that facilitate that fire team just kind of staying in the deployment zone and not moving. The Cyclone isn't bad. Technically, we can add any of these profiles to a fire team, but it is almost always the 28-point Feuerback profile that we could take. And look, that Feuerback does have a 360 visor, but more importantly, it has an X visor pitcher, it's linked, it's ballistic skill 12. It doesn't have bad defensive stats, it's armor 3 BTS 6, it's just that it only has one structure. You are committed to having an engineer usually to repair it, because you will go through speedballs very fast trying to use them to recover a Cyclone. But a Feuerback, once you get a special die onto it, is a fairly well-rounded firepower piece. It's fine. It's not going to be present in any of the lists that we'll show off today. But if you want to run a Securitate fire team, then the Securitate repeater and a couple of Interventors and a Cyclone is kind of a way to do it. Grenzers are a secondary consideration in this fire team just for the marksmanship multi-sniper. This is a case where you could also consider the paramedic Securitate, but I think the day of the Grenzer sniper really kind of has passed in N5. It isn't bad, not exactly. Warhorse and MSV1 are both pieces that will really help prevent you from suffering any negative modifier other than albedo. But this is a faction with a very long list of cool things that cost 30-something points, and the Grenzer has to compete with that. If there were easier ways or more efficient ways to get the Grenzer that duo bonus, I'd be much more on board, but in the context of the Securitate fire team, which necessitates taking Securitate, it's fine, but it is at best fine. This is also the fire team, which is the only place we can see the Kulak payback unit being linkable. If you own Kulak, congratulations, you're a vanilla player, use the Kulak in vanilla, where they are pretty good. 40 points gets you a duo in vanilla of the heavy rocket launcher and the hacker. But in Tunguska, they are inexplicably not linkable in that capacity. In fact, you can only put one Kulak in a Securitate fire team. So they're not necessarily a piece that you would choose to leave at home, but it's more like you take the Killer Hacker with Carbonite and Disco Balls for 20 points, and just do something like put it in Combat Group 2, where it can act as a hacker and throw out Disco Balls and play Cyber Mines and not be fettered by being part of a link team, which it doesn't really need to be a part of. Rounders are also in kind of a weird place this edition. The Rounder Red Fury is kind of unchanged and should still be good. It's a marksmanship MSV1 NCO for 26 points. But it does feel like the game has also shifted around it, and I don't find myself putting Rounders or seeing Rounders terribly often in Jurisdictional Command of Tunguska fire teams. They don't wildcard, they don't get that duo bonus easily, that being really the big thing. If we compare that to N4, it was very easy to build little mixed fire teams that you could put a rounder in and get link team bonuses. In N5, fighting for those link team bonuses out of a Securitate fire team is much more difficult, and so they've really receded a lot from lists for me just off of the back of that. Even Helena Kovac, Securitate DI, is not a particularly interesting or appealing piece, although, look, if you did take a Securitate repeater and Helena, that is an expensive combination, but you do get Tactical Awareness, a Willpower 14 Specialist, a repeater, and a sensor, which you can then conceivably add something like perhaps a rounder or a gunfighting remote into, and have a passable 3-person fire team. I don't love Helena, but she does count as a Securitate, and when we're looking so hard just to get that duo bonus out of this fire team, that does matter, but we are really kind of just reaching the high watermark of what is possible with this light infantry team when we look at things like that. Now, still not great, but with a little bit more potential, we get into the Tunguska Cheerkiller. She technically belongs to what is called the Spetskorps, Special Corps fire team, and Cheerkillers are they're very close to being okay. Super Jump is a very good skill. Unfortunately, CC19 and Martial Arts Level 1 with a Shock CCW is not particularly good close combat. And as a result, in Tunguska Cheerkillers, we kind of see that thing that you get from elite armies in Infinity sometimes, where yes, this costs 2 or 3 more points than a comparable model might be in another army. What are we getting for those points? Elite armies work when you get something effective for the extra points that you're paying. We're really not in the case of Tunguska Cheerkillers. You can build a serviceable enough duo by combining the Specialist Operative Submachine Gun Nanopulsar and one of the profiles with a gun. There is just enough access to generic smoke grenades to potentially make that Ballistic Skill 12 MSV2 Shock Marksman rifle profile potentially feasible, but we're not really looking at Cheerkillers as anything other than a very occasional, oh, I have no SWC, but I want something to do with exactly this remaining 36 points as a use case. Probably the one interesting use case for the Cheerkiller fire team is that, as far as I can tell, I think it's probably the best place to put the new Switches Grouper unit into. Now, there is some awkwardness if you do that, because Switches themselves do not have super jump. But once you get into the enhanced profile, even if the team is declaring jump as a short skill and they're declaring jump as a long skill, you can keep up. And Switches are actually kind of cool on their own merits. They aren't great, but that 18-point profile, it's a forward observer. It's got passable gunfighting if it gets up close with ballistic skill 13 when it's transmuted and an AP submachine gun. But more importantly, in addition to being a specialist, it is a dogged, 6-4 move, martial arts, berserk, good close combat trooper. And while I would not say 18 points is significantly affordable, having a model that can get into close combat and absolutely tear strips off something is just very nice to have much of the time. It also isn't a model with frenzy, and so it's eligible to be your specialist or your silent operative in this ITS season, i.e. it can be given stealth, which gives you, for a fairly affordable price tag, an actual close combat model to join the Cheerkiller team. You can theoretically also run the Switchers solo. Nothing really technically requires them to be part of a link, but we're mentioning them in the context of the Cheerkiller team, because if there is any fire team that they kind of might be interested in joining, it's probably that one. Now, after a long trek through the dark woods of mediocrity, we do finally start getting into our actually good fire teams. And the first of those is what would probably be considered the actually good light infantry fire team of Tunguska, the Bounty Hunter fire team. Now, to build this, you are going to need at least one bounty hunter, and one is usually going to be the correct number, or one motorized bounty hunter, but do be aware that they are irregular. But for 12 points, usually with the boarding shotgun heavy riot stopper profile, you get a close-in model that is difficult to attack in close combat, has a template weapon that is threatening as an ARO piece, booty for the random potential to high roll, and finally a bunch of interesting options we can take advantage of in terms of wild cards. Now, you do have the option to do things like take 2 authorized bounty hunters and then slap a Grenzer into this team. That is frankly going to be about as good as if you took Securitate. But bounty hunters can be taken as duos, and it's the duo options that we will see the most interesting things. Now, the first of these is Miranda Ashcroft, and while I am on record as saying I think Miranda Ashcroft is overrated, it's very important to note that overrated is not the same as bad. Even some 8 months after release of the new edition, you will still sometimes see people talking about Ashcroft as if she nullifies entire categories of enemy models, puts the game on her back, and solos through as both an active and an ARO piece, and that is a significant overstatement because non-lethal weapons are by definition non-lethal, she is a piece that can, for a reasonably costed 28 points plus 12 points for the bounty hunter she's duoed with, have a significant impact on the game. As much as it is important to remember that a non-lethal weapon is non-lethal, a burst 3 plus 1 special die, mimetism 6, ballistics 12, marksmanship, emitter does put a significant weight on what your opponent can realistically use as an ARO piece, particularly if you have a follow-up element to actually kill the thing that you brick with Miranda. Stuff like tags as ARO pieces have to be very careful, and even the humble total reaction bot can theoretically be nullified by her if you just need to get past it in a couple of orders, bearing in mind, of course, that it will be sitting there resetting on ones, and you just know your opponent will roll that some of the time. She's also, frankly, a scary ARO piece because she's still Mimetism 6, she still has Marksmanship, and she's still rolling 1+1 special die, and there are plenty of things in the game that won't really want to risk that face-to-face roll against her, because for all that non-lethal weapons in active turn kind of don't necessarily always solve the problems you need them to solve, a non-lethal weapon in reactive turn has the potential to really brick your opponent's entire turn, particularly if they've had to move up to an awkward position to engage Miranda. I think she is less good than some people think she is, but my impression is that some people think she is the best model in the game or close to, and while I would hope that that position has been moderated by time and experience, she's still very good and very useful. Wolfgang Wolf is also something that it is at least worth talking about in the context of a bounty hunter fire team. Now, unlike Miranda, he is not a specialist, so we're mostly talking in terms of a duo about him really strictly just being a kind of assault piece. But he is a tough, durable, dangerous, and mobile assault piece if that's what you want. He's not really, for me personally, at 34 points. Ballistic skill 12, even when he's firing 5 dice off in active turn, is just not necessarily something that I really like, even before accepting the fact that it's on a 16-inch range multi-rifle. But he has climbing plus. He's very mobile, particularly if you're willing to dodge run. That is, move 6 inches, then dodge on 17s and go 4 inches on the dodge. So he can fairly reliably move 10 inches per order. And he's generally an absolute tick to put down, thanks to 2 wounds, armor 3, BTS 3, and immunity arm. Now again, not a piece I personally reach for terribly often, but it is pretty easy to duo him with a cheap bounty hunter, and there's probably a time and place for him in some lists. While we're talking about bounty hunters and wolf and a few of the similar pieces, it's probably also worth mentioning here a wild card that we haven't previously discussed, which is the Vostok Sputnik. Now, it's the FTO that we're particularly interested in here, 35 points for a Mark 12 with immunity AP 2 structure, armor 3 BTS 6, and mimetism. Now, the FTO option is not a repeater, so if you want to get marksmanship onto it with an Evo hacker, you need to do so while it's still in your own repeater areas. But this is a piece that I haven't seen significantly in N5, and I think deserves at least a little bit of consideration for a comeback. There are a few places we might put this in play in a fire team. One of them is if we're taking a single bounty hunter and something like Wolfgang, the Vostok could add to that reasonably well. Wolfgang and the Vostok both have climbing plus. They move at similar speeds. This gives you a fire team with duo bonuses that moves up the board and kind of fights well in conjunction with itself, but it is very expensive. I think probably the more interesting way, or something that I have a suspicion might be good, is actually as kind of a turn 1 attack element consisting of a Vostok and 2 motorized bounty hunters. Now, this is very experimental, but it's also cheap because these guys are 9 points for the preferred profile. And it's actually kind of possible for me to imagine a top of 1 attack run where a fire team of a Vostok and 2 MBHs moves aggressively up the board, takes face-to-face rolls, the Vostok suppresses AROs, and then the bounty hunters, maybe one of them moves in to punish either the suppressed ARO position or just the fact that your opponent may have null deployed. And once the Vostok has done its work, the irregular orders of the bounty hunters just very naturally split them off from the fire team and go and let them do their thing. It's not a link that I would put in just any old list. This is really strictly, guys, I have a hunch this might be interesting territory, but the Vostok is a cool wild card. Motorized bounty hunters are solid on their own merits, and especially for a list that is gearing up to play a more aggressive scenario, and where you are SWC constrained, if you've gone with expensive SWC options elsewhere in the lists, I think it's something that's kind of worth taking advantage of. All right, That's like a quarter of an hour of talking about the link teams that are not the reason why we're here much of the time. Let's talk about Hollowmen Tactical Assault Team. We've mentioned these quite a lot already in the introductory section, but for completeness, what we're getting here is a regiment that is unique to Tunguska. They have 6-2 move with super jump, which means that on the first movement skill, if they declare super jump, they go 8 inches, which produces a very high mobility team. Their close combat is terrible, their phys is mediocre, but that just helps keeps their cost down, as does the religious troop skill. Their ballistic skill 13 is, look, frankly, it's kind of average, but in a larger fire team that goes up to ballistic skill 14, which is more serviceable. Smaller fire teams, duos, don't really want to be doing long-range gunfighting with high burst where that ballistic skill matters. They want to be acting more as utility and like durable and annoying and mobile pieces. In the larger fire teams, we start being able to actually take face-to-face roles that don't involve, for example, Perseus, who we'll talk about soon, doing the actual heavy listing. Hollow Men are also very durable. Armor 4 and BTS 6 and 2 structure would be good just by itself, but this is a regiment with remote presence. That gives them 2 unconscious states, which means that actually putting a Hollow Man all the way to dead requires inflicting 4 wounds through Armor 4 BTS 6 on a model that gets perfect benefit from cover, etc. That makes them extremely difficult to one-shot in one volley with any kind of weapon in the game, which means that Hollowmen, particularly larger quantities of Hollowmen, when we get up to the 5-person fire team, are excellent in combination with an engineer or even just speedball. They're very amenable to force reconstitution because they're so hard to take from unconscious to dead. They are AVA 5, but usually the most you'll see in a list is 4. But the list of profiles that we have access to is deep enough here that we get that phenomenon that I talked about, where it's very easy to build larger and larger fire teams, each member of which justifies their inclusion. From top to bottom, probably the only profile that we're really not interested in is just the combi rifle chain call. Any of the others might theoretically see play, but that one's not it. However, lots of the others are useful. The multi-rifle chain cult and pitcher is very valuable in Tunguska. It gives us one of the highest ballistic skill pitchers in the game, benefiting from duo bonuses, means we have extremely reliable network projection. If you are in a large Hollow Man team, even firing at long range is going to be 2 dice on 11s, which is an almost 80% chance to hit, and that's at bad range with a -3 penalty. The missile launcher clocking in at only 28 points, like in all of these, right? Every one of these profiles is close to 30, but is below 30, which is really helpful, particularly in a faction where there are plenty of pieces we'll be paying more than 30 points for. The missile launcher is a premier ARO piece. Now, it doesn't have any visibility modifiers, doesn't have any to hit modifiers, doesn't have marksmanship. It's just rolling 2 dice much of the time on something like 14s or 11s. But because it is so durable, your opponent will struggle to put it all the way down to dead, and because it has structure, it can be repaired all the way back up to full health, remote presence allowing you to reroll, meaning that the missile launcher is something of a recurring nightmare for your opponent. Many have been the games across various editions where a Hollow Man missile launcher has been knocked unconscious, then recovered to full health, then knocked unconscious, then recovered to full health, then knocked unconscious, then the Tunguska player has won the game because their opponent spent the entire time fucking around trying to kill one model that wouldn't die. You can run this guy either in duos or in the larger teams, but my personal observation is that I like him in the larger team because we're looking to get up to 4 models, all of which justify themselves, and the missile launcher is one of those. The Spitfire is your active turn gun, and it's fine. It's totally fine. It is not high damage. It is high burst. It'll do to do something like put down a Thunderbolt or get an aggressive pick against a piece that's exposed. But any really hard target that we have to fight, something like a tag that's dug in, we're going to turn that fight over to Perseus, not the Hollow Men themselves. Next up, we've got, technically speaking, 2 profiles, but you can probably also leave the Firewall Combi Rifle profile at home because it's the hacker that we are interested in here. Combi Rifle and Chain Cult, okay, fine. It is sub 30 points for a heavy infantry hacker with a firewall. BTS 6, 2 wounds, etc. makes this guy tremendously difficult to put down. Frankly, he isn't even particularly easy to brick with hacking. He extends a firewall to the entire team, and he's a very useful piece, just in addition to being a specialist generally, a very useful piece to benefit, especially from that 5th level of Fireteam bonuses, getting us to 6th Sense. In the current edition, I mean, just of the game, but particularly the current season of ITS, Stealth is an ability that every army has access to, and having a hacker capable of Spotlight, in addition to every other program that you can do with the regular Hollow Man hacker, having a hacker that can ignore stealth is really valuable in turning your hacking network on for the entire rest of your team. If there's something like a Sujan moving forward, benefiting from stealth because it's been chosen as the stealth ops, having just one Willpower 13 hacker that can respond with Carbonite or Oblivion is usually going to mean that the Sujan is just not willing to make that move through your repeater area. That means your opponent is forced to deal with your pitchers, forced to deal with your repeaters. It adds value to the entire network. And sometimes it's even going to do things like force a reset, which allows other hackers in your army to ARO. This guy, especially when you get to the larger Hollow Man teams, is very valuable, but he's also fine as part of a smaller team going forward and doing specialist stuff. And despite being tied for the most expensive Hollow Man profile, is one of the really good ones. Finally, we have the very cheapest Hollow Man profile, Boarding Shotgun Chain Colt Specialist Operative for a shockingly cheap 21 points. You probably don't take more than one of these in a link team, but you can absolutely take one of these in a link team and have it do close assault duties and press buttons, and even just be an annoying close-in ARO piece, because it just takes time to chew through an Armor 4 BTS 6 model that's responding in ARO with things like a boarding shotgun at close range or a chain colt. And so collectively what we have here is a Fireteam capable regiment that we've just rattled off 4 or 5 profiles, all of which are appealing, all of which can conceivably make their way into a Fireteam, which is why Hollow Men make not just quite serviceable like duo or Haris options, but also one of the game's last true pure 5-man heavy infantry corps. And throughout all of this, of course, I have been mentioning the honorary 5th Hollow Man, who actually counts as a Hollow Man and who is a significant contributor to why this fire team is good, Perseus. Now, let's get some of the important limitations of Perseus out of the way first. Firstly, this dude is 34 points. He's more expensive than any of the Hollow Men. He isn't cheap to include in a list. Secondly, although he is a no wound incapacitation model, he does not have shock immunity. That is something that you need to keep your eye on as you play the game. You cannot just trivially walk this guy through minefields, but happy days, if he's surrounded by Hollow Men, you have plenty of other pieces who can take those hits for him. Finally, he is a model with Frenzy, and Frenzy actually matters in N5, which is going to mean that he only gets one really good turn of gunfighting before he's done a wound to something, and then he gains the limited cover rule, at which point, actually, frankly, he's still really quite good at gunfighting, but a little less good than before. Subject to those limitations, this guy is an absolute goer. Firstly, 4-4 move with super jump. Not quite as fast as Hollow Men, but plenty fast, and not at all difficult to deliver into close combat, particularly because he has stealth. He also has ballistic skill attack +1 burst, which is going to combine very nicely with fire team bonuses and either the multi or breaker combi rifle. I very lightly lean toward the breaker combi rifle, but your mileage may vary. The issue with breaker is, as always, the presence of some things in the game that randomly have armor 2 BTS 6, armor 4 BTS 6, armor 4 BTS 9. And so depending on the weapon loadout you have in your Hollow Men team, kind of just think about whether or not you can deal with those challenges. If you can, the breaker combi rifle may be better, the multi-rifle is a little bit more well-rounded. Really, we're just splitting hairs, this is a matter of personal preference. In either case, this guy can roll up around a corner and roll 5 dice on 13s or 14s, with Mimetism 6 protecting him coming the other way. He's also excellent in close combat with CC23, Martial Arts 3. He has Burst 2 smoke grenades that also benefit from the Fireteam special die, which means that he is just the most reliable smoke thrower in the entire game. Even at long range, you'll be doing things like able to throw 3 dice on 10s or 11s in a sufficiently large fire team, which is hugely reliable for getting those smoke grenades out. I have seen him miss smoke grenades on occasion, but it is very rare. Couple the good gunfighting with the reasonable durability, with the incredibly reliable smoke and the good close combat and the stealth, and you have a tip of the spear model that can just deal the damage and kill almost anything that the Hollow Men themselves don't want to deal with. Very hard targets, no worries, Perseus has got this. If it's a really, really hard target, like you're going into a Jotun in melee, you even start doing things like just bringing the Hollow Men in to help out. because they are comfortably durable enough to take the counter blow if your opponent tries to deal a CC attack to them, and the extra burst to Perseus really ramps his lethality up. It's not difficult against a sufficiently large hardened target to get multiple friendlies into close combat if he's in a Hollow Man Link team, and at that point he isn't just winning face-to-face rolls, but he's doing things like inflicting 6, 7, 8 saving throws at damage 5, which starts putting even a Yotum down with a few orders. This guy is just really solid as a tip of the spear, a very powerful piece, and learning how to use him in Tunguska in N5 is going to be extremely important. Now, not only is he a valuable part of the Hollow Man team, but he also forms a very serviceable duo. If you want the cheap and cheerful version, perhaps you're running a list without any Hollow Men, what you can do, rather than take him in a Hollow Man team, is run him in a Naamnic team, that's a mercenary fire team, where you will basically just have Perseus and a single 17-point FTO Stemplozond. Now, Pathfinder chassis zones in N5, like all of these kinds of remotes, which are 6/4 move with Deactivator, Repeater, and Sensor and Forward Observer, are just a valuable team, like just a valuable model to have in lists in this edition. You can discover and then sweep out equipment that's in the way. I mentioned that one of the things Perseus is scared of is mines. Well, not to worry, what if we could come up behind a wall, discover that mine through the wall, and turn it off with a deactivator, all basically on near certain rolls? Yes, it's a touch order intensive, but it clears the way for Perseus to make an attack run unhindered. It's also a specialist, it gives Perseus the duo bonuses. It discovers things that maybe he can't. It's basically just a perfect buddy cop for him if you don't want to run him in a Hollow Man team. And thanks to Super Jump, it keeps up just fine. Now, strictly speaking, there is one other person that can also join this fire team, a unique Tunguska character, Raoul Spectre, but I'm going to make the argument here that I think if we're taking Spectre more of the time, we want him in his solo operator form as a parachutist and combat jump trooper. And so, having finished therefore talking about link teams, let's talk about Tunguska's solo and independent operators, starting with Raoul Spectre, mercenary operative. Now, a little bit like Perseus, we are dealing with a model that does have no wound incapacitation but does not have shock immunity. Keep that in mind when you are using this guy, because if you randomly walk him into a deployment zone mine, you have a slightly too high chance of having a very bad day. Subject to that limitation, this is 32 points is not cheap, but this is a really good profile. There are a collection of things here that are very, very nice to have. Firstly, he has both parachutist and combat jump, and he has 6/2 move with jet propulsion, which means he absolutely motors once he's on the board. 8 inches of true 3-dimensional movement on the first short skill gets him into close combat around corners with extraordinary ease, and he has the close combat to take advantage of that. He's not a really, really exceptional piece, but he's good enough to punch down into most things that might be, like he might want to take advantage of that EMCW against, with CC22 and Martial Arts level 2. He'll be rolling on 25s, your opponent will have a -3, and he can comfortably risk going into close combat against things, for example, with para CCWs, because he has Natural Born Warrior. I had a game this week using vanilla Nomads against Tunguska in preparation for this episode, and I spent very slightly too little time thinking about the threat that Raoul Spectre posed, even though I was relatively sure he was coming, and so he arrived slightly behind a building, past his roll to land, came around a corner into close combat with my Gator, which, despite the fact that the Gator is very good usually at defending itself in close combat thanks to CC20 and CC attack -6, Raoul Spectre handily ignored all of that and beat the tag the fuck to death. Even if you aren't getting into close combat, Raoul is an exceptional close assault piece with Mimetism -6 and a boarding shotgun +1 burst, which is just fantastic at making attacks at close range, even just with the shotgun. 3 dice on 18s when you have cover and Mim 6 is just very challenging for almost anything to beat. I've mentioned in the past that I love boarding shotgun +1 burst, and Raoul Spectre is no exception. He's even got drop bears to do really annoying things, although Fizz 13, he's going to miss them some of the time. He even has a template weapon, a power and strength, or a probability of survival 6 boarding pistol, although frankly there are very few circumstances where you won't just shoot someone with the boarding shotgun or walk into close combat. On top of all of that, he's a specialist operative. This guy is just a complete package. Now, 32 points is too expensive to say auto-include, put in every list, particularly since we're looking at pieces like Perseus for 34. But there is an old adage that drop troops never lose games, they only win them. That's wrong in the strictest sense, and we'll actually talk about that when we get to another profile. But this is a guy that can just crack open games by himself if he lands, if he makes the right moves. If he connects in the right way, he is a perfect example of how a combat jump or parachutist trooper in N5 can crack open the game off of their own back. He's very worth having in your collection, perhaps as a conversion because his model is a little bit janky, but a strongly recommended piece. Now, we have a lot more models in this profile list to get through in the solo operators piece, so we're going to kind of speed through a few of them. Kriza Borak, he's good. 45 points is eminently reasonable for 5 dice downrange at ballistic skill 13 on a reasonable durable chassis with ballistic skill attack -3. This guy is back to his old tricks that he had in N3. Now he's not as good as he was in N3 because there are counters now to BS attack -3, but the Kriza Borak is just excellent. He's even good at close assault because all of those modifiers, BS attack +1 burst, BS attack -3, work on his heavy pistol, which means that if he rounds a corner against you, he's still a threat. Not necessarily an auto include, but I have a very soft spot for him, and there is usually some merit to having at least one decent gun in your list, if just to do things like kill total reaction bots, and the Kriza Borak is very good at that. At the top end of the same kind of I want a firepower piece category, we have the Salamander Squadron. 68 points is cheap, 2 SWC is not. It is a ballistic skill 14 HRMC, and as such is very, very good at going BRRT. Now, it does not have tactical awareness, it only has NCO, and this is a faction where much of the time we will have a lieutenant that is very capable of spending their own LT order, so that's not quite as valuable as we might like, leaving the Salamander merely as a totally fine tag. But sometimes there is no substitute for truly overwhelming firepower on a reasonable durable chassis, and the Salamander is that. Now, I would say that Tunguska is really not a faction where we're reaching for main battle tags particularly often. There are just slightly too many pieces in the 27, 28, 29, 32, 34 point bracket to easily fit a tag. But that is not an indictment of the Salamandra itself, which is fine, good, fires a lot of very dangerous bullets downrange. That's just very valuable to have sometimes. I will usually reach more towards something like a Kriza Borak, or even consider trying to play a game really not relying on active turn firepower pieces particularly much at all, and instead play mission and asymmetrically and drop troops and ARO kills. But the Salamander is a banger of a model, fine and good, and if you are playing a collection of vanilla Nomads and Tunguska as like a paired collection, then you want to own at least one Silhouette 7 tag, and the Salamander is an incredible model. Next up, segueing hard away from firepower pieces, we have Interventors. These guys are a flagship profile for this faction, despite the fact that they are really not particularly expensive, and bang for buck, they are just some of the best hackers in the entire game. There are some very small arguments to be made that there are hackers that outperform them in absolute terms, in Combined Army and OSS, and there are some hackers that are maybe a little bit more efficient than them point for point. But those are extremely few and far between. There are very few comparisons to Tunguska Interventors in terms of getting, for a cheap price, very, very nearly high watermark in the entire game, hacking capability. I like to take, personally, 2 of these at least in any given list. And those 2 preferred profiles are either of the Lieutenant profiles, basically do you have 2 spare points for the Fast Panda or not, but a hacking device plus Lieutenant does a few things. Firstly, willpower 15 Lieutenant. That's really, really good. Secondly, this is a model that can very, very easily spend the Lieutenant order. Because it's a hacking device plus, firstly, you have just a suite of different options offensively to mess with your opponent, but equally importantly, you can always just use Lieutenant order to cybermask. And having a willpower 15 Lieutenant who is very capable and can do things like active turn spotlight, but in reactive turn, as durable as Interventors are, right? BTS 9 is very, very good. You can still just get unlucky in a face-to-face roll against a killer hacker if they land a pitcher on your head, randomly roll a 16 to save, take a wound, and go unconscious, and we will not often be taking Chain of Command in Tunguska. For that reason, you will often want to just consider, appraise your opponent's hacking options. Are they a threat to you? Bam, into Cybermask on the first turn, and only come out when you are confident you've established Info War dominance. To establish that Info War dominance, we turn to our second preferred Interventor profile, which is the 18-point Killer Hacker with Boarding Shotgun and Fast Panda. This guy is one of my favorite profiles in the game. Because he has a KHD, he can cybermask himself, which means he can get up the field to deliver that Fast Panda. Having delivered the Fast Panda, he is, 4 points, the most dangerous killer hacker in the game. Willpower 15 and BTS 9, and Trinity with -3 means that you are stacking In addition to the firewall, -6 mods on your opponent while usually rolling 3 dice on 18s yourself. Now, there are no damage modifiers, which means that if you're doing something like hunting an enemy interventor, you will need to just keep forcing face-to-face rolls until you break through. But for only 18 points, this is just tremendously lethal as far as KHDs go. You can supplement your hacking network with things like a tag tree buff or just like another killer hacker. There are also a few different pieces throughout Tunguska that are things like hackers with Trinity or KHDs with Carbonite that you can also potentially supplement a network with. But this guy is the one who is going to be doing the lethal assassination of enemy hackers, either by using the Fast Panda themselves or with a pitcher fired off by a Cyclone or a Hollow Man. Incredibly dangerous, part of what contributes to Tunguska being a high watermark hacking faction, and I am pretty comfortable recommending that most of your list should include an Interventor LT for Whip 15 and a Great Hacker, and an Interventor KHD to establish that dominance. These guys are just really, really good. Do not leave home without them. Now, supplementing the discussion around the hacking game, there are a few other pieces at least that we should probably talk about. The first is Hecklers. Now, I don't personally hugely rate these guys, but they are not bad. Ballistic skill 12, mimetism, and some reasonable gunfighting options. I'm actually quite partial to the boarding shotgun +1 burst Emarat profile, just to kind of like hang around and maybe move forward and do something really dangerous at some point. Deployment zone or deployment zone adjacent Emarats are the kind of thing that can just save games against a lethal attack element in any case, and being able to move forward and fire 3 dice on 18s with the boarding shotgun, with surprise, with mimetism, is very appealing, but in Tunguska we do have a very interesting unique profile, and that is the Combi Rifle Jammer and Fast Panda. Now, I will usually rely on either Fast Pandas from the Interventor KHD, since I'm taking it already, or pitches from my multiple linked models to do network projection, but this is a model that natively has camouflage and forward deploys 4 inches and has a Fast Panda, so it's another way of getting your network forward, and the Jammer is pretty relevant. It's only willpower 13, but a Jammer is a Jammer, and with passive reloads from baggage, it is distinctly possible to have maybe 1 or 2 of these guys in the right list, just set up in positions where at least one of them, maybe both, are in zone of control of a baggage bot, able to just comfortably use that disposable jammer in the knowledge they will reload. In scenarios, for example, like Beepong or Capture and Protect, which if you're in Australia, both feature in the scenario list for Burn City Brawl in Melbourne, which is a scenario that's coming up. Those are the kind of scenarios where concentrating your defenses in one place is quite valuable, and jammers add one more element that can work against pieces that would otherwise not be susceptible to hacking, and that's kind of useful. I do definitely think hecklers are a sometimes pick. 20 points and 23 points are both just a little bit too expensive to slot easily into a list when we have other expensive pieces that we're interested in taking, but they are cool and they can supplement a force very nicely. Finally, just on the broader hacking game, before we move on to some other independent pieces that are cool and interesting, Merry Problems is at least worth a look in. I have a soft spot for her, even if in practice I think you can probably pretty strongly argue that she's obsoleted a little bit by just taking that Interventor and Interventor KHD combination that I meant. But she does have a use case some of the time, particularly because, I mean, she's a Ballistic Skill 12 pitcher herself with forward deployment. Rolling 1 dice on 12s is not what you really want to be doing in Tunguska, but it is something that you can consider. But really what she's about here is the upgrades that she has on her programs. Oblivion +1 Burst is fantastic in active turn under the right circumstances. There are some games where you can just be like, oh, that's Joan of Arc. Let's just not deal with Inspiring Leadership this game, please. Let's just force you onto Chain of Command immediately. And in that circumstance, 3 dice on 14s is much better than 2 dice on 15s from your Interventor. Trinity Armor Piercing is also just one of those upgrades that's very good to have. As much as the Interventor KHD with Trinity -3 is fantastic, if you are trying to push through an opposing BTS 9 or even sometimes BTS 6 enemy hacker, Trinity AP just can be very valuable for getting you there. Now, is she worth 27 points and half an SWC? No, most of the time she's not. But depending on your metagame, if you are interested in being the top dog hacker and you expect to play against things like Combined Army or Operation Subsection with an Asura, just remembering that she exists can be worth it from time to time. Now from here we move on to Puppet Bots, a favorite of mine across many editions now, and in N5 as it was in N4, a source of the tactical window. I like to think of it more as tactical suggestion. Now, the Puppet Master alone is great value for 11 points, or however many you pay for him, whichever profile you take, because 11 points for a regular order and counterintelligence is just really, really good. There's nothing else in the game that compares to that in terms of access to counterintelligence. But what gets really great is, of course, the Puppet Bots themselves. Now, these are remotes, so they can be given supportware, and you can take between 0 and 3 of them, and they act effectively as a little fire team of their own. They don't get fire team bonuses, but they move around the board like one. And thanks to transmutation, they are 2 structure troopers. Yes, they degrade a little bit when they take a wound, but 2 wounds is 2 wounds. And 2 wounds for 9 points with a +1 burst boarding shotgun and +1 burst forward observer and ballistic skill 12 and a willpower 14 specialist is just exceptional. Much of the time, depending on how you're choosing to defend with Tunguska, if you don't have hard ARO pieces, puppet bots can serve as your ablative element. 2 of these guys for 9 points each is 18 points, and they can occupy picket zones, like picket positions on the in your deployment zone, blocking off approaches into the depth of your deployment zone, where the ballistic steel 12 boarding shotgun and the flash pulse and the fact that they have 2 wounds just makes them a challenge to get through in an efficient way before your opponent can get to the GUI center. On the offense, they are fast, they are dangerous. They only have ballistic steel attack +1 burst in the first profile. When they transmute, they lose that, but coming around a corner, that's still 3 dice on 18s, and if they take a wound, you just have the next puppet bot move in and take over. And if you leave these guys in the midfield, the same deal, they're just very annoying to deal with. I love puppet bots, I love peripherals, I love expendable troops in the knowledge that, like, this is going to take time for my opponent to kill and not cost me orders when it dies. We will see these in my list, we will see these in Lachlan's list, and we will see these in vanilla lists, and it's the presence of puppets in both of those armies that really is part of that crossover DNA that makes owning Tunguska and owning Nomads not too challenging as part of the same collection. Even if you don't take the puppets themselves, and you should basically always take the 11-point Puppet Master just for counterintelligence. This is an extreme value regiment. Now, moving on through a few more things, the Zondnort Rapid Offensive Unit is something that has a personal special place in my heart. Doesn't find its way into too many lists, but 17 points, especially for the Zondnortica B, is a very efficient offensive regiment. Strictly speaking, it's only Vitality 1, but when you transform into the 2 different things, you can use the bike itself as a disposable piece, and throwing around the boarding shotgun and the chain rifle in the same attack is kind of cool. Ultimately, these guys are a rare pick even at 17 points for the cheapest profile, but they are worth your time and they are worth considering from list to list. Next up, we have the Meteor Zond, which was a meme for the longest time across multiple editions, but in N5 is actually just totally viable. 19 points for the boarding shotgun flash pulse profile is at that price point where you can put this guy into a list just for the chance to high roll and do something incredible. As I mentioned before, there's a little bit of an adage around drop troops. Drop troops never lose games, they only win them. Now, as I mentioned, that's wrong in the most strict of senses, but is a way of thinking about the performance floor versus the performance ceiling of a model. And that's particularly pertinent for drop troops because the performance floor is so visible. Usually the worst performance, and one which you will run into in games, is that you fail your combat jump, walk on in the deployment zone, and do nothing for the rest of the game. In that case, we can see the performance flaw of the Meteor Zond. The opportunity cost of taking it was the 19 points you spent on it that you didn't spend on something else. And if you try to land it on turn 1, it will not begin generating orders until turn 2, which means the total opportunity cost to accomplish very little is 1 regular order and 19 points. That's not a lot. It's not nothing, but that is not a particularly high opportunity cost when we compare it to like a Transductor Zond, a Stempler Zond, even a Warcore in the same combat slot. And by accepting that, some of the time we will hit that performance floor, and where the points that we spent on the Meteor Zond only being used to generate maybe 2 regular orders over the course of the entire game, the high watermark, the ceiling of performance for a Meteor Zond, is impressive. It lands on 12s, or it parachutists on. You can use the Border Skirmishers rule to auto-land in scenarios with an exclusion zone. And when it lands, not only is it a specialist with sensor just randomly, which can be very valuable under the right circumstances, but it is a repeater. It's a repeater that has landed in your opponent's deployment zone and which can move around. And that presents the possibility for all sorts of mischief. It's even difficult to counter hack thanks to BTS 6 and ECM Hacker, which keeps the repeater online. through things like Oblivion AROs, for example. And then on top of all of that, it is a 6/4 move jet propulsion piece with a boarding shotgun. Now it's only ballistic skill 11, but 2 dice on 17s coming around the corner against an unarmed, like a model with a combi rifle that you suspect might be your opponent's lieutenant, for example, with 8 inches of jet propulsion movement and the ballistic skill attack, is the kind of face-to-face roll that isn't guaranteed to succeed, but if it does, might just win you the entire game. Now, Meteor Zons are not an auto-include, but in N5, for such a relatively affordable points cost, sub 20 points, you've got a piece that can just splash into lists and might win you the game. That's kind of the niche that drop troops serve in N5, where finally we are in an edition where the cost of combat jump is actually very commensurate with the opportunity cost, and where the performance floor and the performance ceiling of combat jump troops is acceptable for the points cost, and the Meteor Zond is just one of those pieces that is an exemplar of that. Now, a couple more profiles to mention. Dan McConnelly, he's 12 points. Take him. He's regular. He's good in close combat, and he has Fizz 14 smoke grenades. There's some other stuff as well, but like that's basically it. Good in close combat, has smoke grenades, regular, 12 points, Fizz 14. Zen McConnelly. Slightly more niche in this edition are the Zellenkriegers. Actually just kind of not fantastic in close combat, but good enough. CC23 with CC attack -3 is like the bare minimum on what constitutes actually kind of okay in close combat, particularly when we consider that the damage of their weapons, although its DA is only PS7, but failing all of that, you still have Fizz 13 smoke grenades, you have metachemistry with a reroll, which can really high roll on these guys, and the heavy pistol +1 burst and pulsar profile does give you a fairly nice ARO fork. I don't put these in lists a ton. I think they are less transformative for Tunguska in N5 than they were in N4, but you are often going to need to pad a list out in Tunguska thanks to other like 20 to 30 to 35 point pieces, and 8 points is 8 points for a model that is probably going to do something. Now, finally, we should discuss the Gopod. In absolute terms, it's probably pretty fair to say that the Gopod is one of the best vehicles. I think the competition for that particular place is basically between the Gopod and the Red-Eye, depending on what you value. Both of them are competing for strong second place behind the best vehicle in the game, which isn't a vehicle at all, which is the Garuda Tactbot, which just outperforms both of them by an enormous margin. Now, there are other players out there with much more experience with vehicles than me. There are many players out there with more experience with the Gopod than me. It was very popular in lists early in N5, and it really isn't hard to see why. Even with the no cover rule, on paper, a 3 dice heavy rocket launcher and a 4 dice AP submachine gun, usually stacking a relatively reliable at least -3 but more often -6 onto your opponent before bonuses for range, thanks to ballistic skill attack -3 and mimetism, plus the Gobot peripheral, giving you either a free chain colt or a free flash pulse, combined with the speed of the Gopod as a vehicle, is all kind of appealing. But the conclusion that I am increasingly coming to with regards to vehicles is that they are kind of the inverse of combat jump and parachutist troops. How I am increasingly feeling about vehicles is that I want to say something like, vehicles will never win you a game, they will only lose you a game. That's a statement that is strictly wrong, in the same way that the inverse is strictly wrong when talking about jump troops. But it leads us towards a discussion around performance ceiling and performance floors. Because the difference in performance between the best a Gopod can do and the worst a Gopod can do is stark. In fact, it is more stark even than a combat jump trooper like the Meteor Zond, and the Gopod is much, much more expensive in terms of both points and SWC. The experience that I fairly consistently have with the Gopod is that if other models do the heavy lifting on turn 1, and other models take the casualties, and other models clear the way, on turn 2, I can make a run with a Gopod that can often do quite interesting things. That 11-inch first movement with super jump jet propulsion gets you some very powerful angles once it gets up the board a little bit, and both the heavy rocket launcher and AP submachine gun are well suited to capitalize under different circumstances. But it is always other models that have to do the heavy lifting to get the Gopod into position where it can make those attack runs, because the Gopod is not itself suited to suppressing hard ARO pieces. Now, it looks like it should be, right? If we say, oh, well, we'll fight a Thunderbolt total reaction bot, or we'll fight, an enemy heavy infantry with a flare back, because we've got all of these different modifiers, and +1 burst, and extra damage, surely the heavy rocket launcher will be fine. And some of the time that is the case, but it is incredibly easy when you are yourself rolling 3 dice on 13s to have a dice spread that just goes 1, 2, 14, or 5, 16, 17, or something, and you just don't significantly connect, and your opponent rolls an 8 and hits you with something like a Flareback, or 2 Thunderbolt shots get through randomly from a Thunderbolt total reaction bot. And at that point, we start to see how incredibly fragile the Gopod is, and this is actually why the Red Eye really competes with it, despite the fact that the Red Eye is much more expensive and is armed with a Spitfire rather than a HRL with all of these different modifiers. The Gopod has no cover and is armor 2, which means that its durability compared to a model in cover is equivalent to something with armor -1. The second it gets hit, it goes down in absolute flames, and while you can recover a vehicle, because the aerial rule turns off when it's unconscious, so you can get either an engineer or a speedball up to it and recover it, the likelihood of your Gopod just failing you terribly and toilet bowling an entire first turn if you use it to suppress enemy ARO pieces is high enough that across a 3 or 5 round event, it's going to materialize at some point. On top of that, the Gopod is hugely vulnerable in reactive turn because it's armor 2, and your opponent will invariably bring up a firepower piece that has either Warhorse or an MSV, making it very susceptible to enemy counter battery fire. And because it's Silhouette 7, it's an absolute bastard to hide, which means that in reactive turn, you can use the Gopod, kind of as an ARO piece, but the Gopod itself has a massive target on it. And that means that although the performance ceiling for a vehicle like the Gopod is high, right? You can absolutely point to games where the Gopod on turn 2 went on a tear, got enfilade shots after you'd suppressed your opponent's hackers and suppressed your opponent's ARO pieces, and it tore shit up. Even that performance ceiling is usually off the back of significant efforts on the part of other models, and the performance flaw is that this thing is dead weight early in the game for a lot of SWC and a surprisingly large number of points. It is hugely vulnerable to hacking, it has no defense against it, and if it gets isolated and immobilized while it's hiding behind some tall building in your deployment zone, you are never getting it out of that state. It cannot attack into a repeater network. It needs all of these different things to set up plays for it. And so the conclusion I am increasingly coming to is that models like GoPods will never win you a game, they will only lose you one. Any game that you were going to win because of the GoPod's plays probably came as a result of other things doing significant damage to your opponent. Interventors neutralizing your opponent's hacking network. Some other firepower piece suppressing opponent's ARO pieces. And if you've done all of those things, you don't need a Gopod to secure the win. It's just going to showboat in, yes, potentially do a whole bunch of damage, but not necessarily accomplish something that we couldn't have used another piece to do. I am really not liking it at the moment, but not by enough to say that it is a lost cause. Just if you're going to use a Gopod, because look, frankly, there is a huge amount of joy in moving something 11 inches with jet propulsion as a short skill, right? I cannot deny that. The movements that you can make, the angles that you can get, moving these pieces around the board and just looking from like a point in mid-air, 6 inches above the table, that you were able to reach thanks to a combination of Super Jump and Silhouette 7, you can get some feelings of power from that. But if you're going to use a Gopod, you have to build everything else into your list to enable it to succeed. You need tools to neutralize enemy hard AROs that you really shouldn't be fighting with it. And you absolutely need tools to neutralize enemy hacking networks that will completely shut it down the moment it wanders into an enemy hacking network, repeater area, etc. Fortunately, Tunguska does kind of have pieces like that, particularly in terms of dealing with the info war threat. As mentioned, Tunguska is frankly one of the best factions in the game, possibly the best faction in the game, at combining reliable repeater projection, even at very long ranges, with very, very good anti-hacker hackers. There are really no models in the game like a linked Holoman for landing a picture, thanks to the combination of super jump for those same weird angles, and its mobility and its ballistic skill and its links. There are really no models like an Interventor for capitalizing on that subsequently placed picture to eliminate enemy hackers, and so that at least does help set the Gopod up for success. You've also got smoke, potentially get the past ARO pieces. You have a reasonable selection of your own other gunfighters to potentially clear the way. Things like a Kreezer Borak, for example, are probably affordable enough. You could even feasibly fit a Salamander and a Gopod in the same list, although that's not particularly comfortable if you want anything else that's particularly elite. So it is possible to make the Gopod work in Tunguska, but that's kind of the ultimate conclusion. The Gopod is a piece, despite the fact that on paper it looks awesome, the Gopod is a piece that you need to make work. Do not approach the game thinking it's going to be the carry. You need to set this guy up for success. Actually, I think in League of Legends nomenclature, making it the definition of a carry. Farm up all the preconditions for this guy to have success, and at that point, it will pay off. And with that, let's get into two sample lists for Tunguska Jurisdictional Command. The first of these is called Jump Up and Get Down. I can't quite fit the name on the screen because there are so many lines of text here, in particular thanks to the Interventor KHD, which somehow manages to occupy 3 lines of text in the army by itself. But this list comes courtesy of Lachlan, and it was one of 2 lists that he played at Tunguska Jurisdictional Command. Now, I played at Border Bash. Now, I believe he's gone on Loss of Lieutenant to talk about this list. You can find a recording there. But as a quick summary, both of Lachlan's lists were built around Hollow Men cores. Both of them are lists that learned the lesson of a Sydney player called Tom Bowl, who in his day was the uncontested master of the Hollow Man link. And of the 2, I picked this one because it has Rail Spectre in it. Now, the other version of the list didn't have Raow, it didn't have 2 Hollow Man missile launchers, it had a boarding shotgun Hollow Man instead. It did fit a Vertigo Zon for guided missile play, but I wanted to feature Raow in at least one of these, and so this is the list that does that. From the top, we have a full 5-person Hollow Man core, a very spicy 2 Hollow Man missile launchers, a hacker, a Hollow Man pitcher, and Perseus. The flex point here really is the second Hollow Man missile launcher. The second one of those is absolutely viable, but you can also replace that, for example, with something like the boarding shotgun piece. These are going to move forward, do things, move backwards, reoccupy a defensive position, and then make the missile launchers your opponent's problem in reactive turn. Perseus will generally do the active turn gunfighting much of the time if there's something to go and kill. Just generally, these guys play the Hollow Man game, bounce around the table, lay pitches, be a Sixth Sense hacker, be very durable, and we will see an engineer in the second combat group that's going to play off of these guys. We've then got a Transductor Zond, 2 Interventors, 1 KHD, 1 Lieutenant with Hacking Device Plus, exactly as we'll see in my list, and Combat Jump Rail Spectre. Single 12-point Bounty Hunter, functioning I assume mostly as a border guard. He's got a heavy riot stopper and can potentially stop things before they penetrate too far into the DZ. Then a Transductor Zond, another 12-point Bounty Hunter, again because these guys aren't in the same combat group. We don't expect to see them linked, they'll be spread out using their riot stoppers as defensive pieces. Den McConnelly, another Transductor Zond, and then a Clockmaker with 2 Zonbots and a Salamander KHD. The Clockmaker, you'll note the only things really in the entire list that he's going to be potentially repairing are the Transductor Zons and the Hollow Men. Often the Transductor Zons I would expect just to be dug into Fluent Zone Repeaters, not using their flash pulses. The 2 different Zonbots and the Hollowmaker are present so that the Hollow Men can occupy a variety of different positions. There will often be turns, if the Hollow Men link has taken significant damage, where this Clockmaker wants to be all over the place, recovering different ones, like doing lots and lots of work on them, and these Zonbots mean that when the Hollow Men move forward and pull back, they can pull back to different positions around the deployment zone without being chained always back to one position. This is a good example of a list that maintains some other offensive elements in addition to the full 5-person Hollow Man core. The Hollow Man core is fearsome, particularly with a double missile launcher setup. And with 2 KHDs, thanks to the Salamandra, you even have some interesting options in terms of how you spend your orders. If the Clockmaker is not spending orders, for example, in turn 1, I would not be surprised if on the first turn of many games, 5 orders in Group 2 are being spent by the Salamandra pilot Killer Hacker just doing Killer Hacker things. If there was one change I would personally make around this list, and it's only a maybe, I would strongly consider cutting one of the bounty hunters for Puppet Master. No particular need to add puppet bots. I like puppet bots, but no particular need to add them. They were, it should be noted, absolutely in Lachlan's first list he understands how powerful they are, but just for the ability to have counterintelligence for the same price point as a bounty hunter, it's something I would be leaning towards. However, noting that the Puppet Master is present in Lachlan's first list, I'm pretty sure he understands all of that and that this is a fairly calculated decision. There were a bunch of different scenarios at Border Bash which had some very hostile elements in them, and so I can see looking for any given edge in any different scenario in that particular case. Now, our second list as a showcase is one that I have written, and this is one of those ones that came together actually in a way that is not what I expected. The goal here was to showcase what can be done with different Fireteam duos. And originally this had Raoul Spectre present as well. Now, he would be very good. I would fit him in the list if I could, but one of those things happened where I'm just like, I can't quite fit this and I can't quite fit this. I've got some point spare now having made some cuts. What happens if I cut Raoul Spectre and the third puppet bot? And what I found was that I had exactly 45 points left, and since I had one Kriza Borak already, why not a second Kriza Borak? They can legally duo. They get Fireteam duo bonuses. Is this good? Probably, actually, probably not. But it is very funny. So from the top, we have a Puppet Master team. One Forward Observer, one AP Marksman Rifle. You will see an Evo Hacker in Group 2, able to hand out marksmanship and, importantly, provide reloads. Originally, there was an intention that this list had a Combat Jump Trooper, and that would be part of what the Evo Hacker was doing. Now, it doesn't. That's something that you could consider changing. We've then got the two Interventors, the Lieutenant and the Interventor KHD. Excellent choices. Den McConnelly, Perseus, and a Hollow Man. Perseus, in this case, is duoed with the Hollow Man Pitcher, which means that there is no specialist here. This list is mildly light on specialists that can move forward easily. I wanted to have the Pitcher to take full advantage of the baggage bot, but trimming that Hollow Man and running this as a Naamnic team is something that you could easily do to do something like, for example, fit a Meteor Zond into a list. We then have, as noted, the meme that is the Kriza Borak duo. 6 dice is a nice number of dice. Oftentimes, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually don't duo these guys and we just split them on different parts of the deployment zone. You don't really need a 6 dice for the Kriza Borak to be able to suppress anything that it's going to suppress. Once you're at 5 dice, adding a 6 doesn't really move the needle particularly much, but it is very funny. Definitely, again, if you're approaching Tunguska from first principles yourself, one Kriza Borak is probably all you're going to need much of the time, particularly if you have ample sources of smoke and white noise. But once I added the second one to the list, I really didn't want to cut it. We've then got two Transductor Zons, segueing into Group 2. We've got a Salyot Evo Hacker. The only thing it's really doing is providing reloads for things like the pitches and the fast pandas and marksmanship potentially for the puppets. Definitely is some consideration to tuning this back down just to a regular baggage bot. This list is not hugely competitively optimized, but if you do, for example, trim Perseus and the Hollow Man into Perseus and the Stemplazond, you will probably find that there are enough points spare to turn something else in the list into, say, a Meteor Zond, and at that point, Assisted Jump is also doing some work, and we're justifying the Salyut a little bit more. We've got a Salamander KHD Hacker for the exact same reason as we will see it in Lachlan's list. Also to note, a Salamander pilot in Group 2, if it isn't doing KHD things, can spend orders laying cyber mines. That's just cool and nice. And then finally, rounding out the group, one Zellenkrieger, one War Correspondent, it's cheap, and one Vertigo Zond. That gives you the guided missile play. We've only got the Lieutenant for Spotlight, but Willpower 15 is good Spotlight. I would not really intend to do a significant amount of missile play with this list, but if your opponent null deploys and you're looking to punish that, it's one of the ways you have to do that. If we wanted to tinker with this list in real time, definitely cutting the Hollow Man down into a Stemplazon just to see what we can get is a line that I would take. I'm pretty sure at a glance that it, among other things, would just fit another puppet bot into the list if that's what we wanted. But if we're willing to do something like cut a Kriza Borak, we're also very close to being able to get potentially 2 drop troops into the list in the form of a Meteor and Raoul Spectre. Bunch of different things that you can do here. The Kriza Boraks are present because once I'd added the second, it was too funny not to include, but lots of different room to move on this one. Now, this video has run long enough, so we're going to wrap it up there. Just as a usual quick channel plug, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Go ahead and like and subscribe, all of that usual stuff. I will usually put videos out once a week. That's something that I've been hitting on a regular basis, but this is going to be the second video this weekend. I had time to do the recording, and as noted, I had a bunch of input from people that I've got access to, including Lachlan, including Inane Imp, that's Rob, a bunch of locals, including Muster Crux and Azuth. Big thank you to everyone who helped make this possible, including, of course, as always, the channel supporters. That'll do it for now. Hope very much that you've enjoyed this, Otherwise, I will see you next week with more Infinity content.